Well, you couldn't see.
She couldn't see anything.
Yeah, I'm ready, so I'm gonna go ahead. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for coming out on this snowy, windy night to the Chittenden Solid Waste District Board of Commissioners meeting for January. The first item on the agenda, actually, I believe, is a public hearing for our budget, which we are required to do every year about this time. So I do not see any members of the public unless, am I missing someone?
No.
Okay, so if someone comes in, absolutely, we will allow them to ask questions and anything like that. So, okay, next item, I believe, are there any updates to the agenda that we ought to make?
We want to add one item into executive session, another contract question about biosolids. So one other item in executive session.
Okay,
Do we
Yes.
need to close the public hearing?
if you want, we can. We talked about it, I wasn't sure we really need it, but if you, I don't honestly don't think we do, but Amy, are you okay with that, or Mary Ann, I should say? Okay. I didn't
We
think
can
so.
reflect in the minutes that it was open and closed. So
Yeah.
we'll do that.
Okay, so we have one additional item on the agenda for executive session. So the next item, I believe, is the minutes.
Correct.
So do we have a
Move the minutes of the 19th.
Seconded.
motion and a second? Any additions, corrections, deletions? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstentions? Okay, motion passes. All right, next, I believe, is finance. We turn that over to Deke, I believe.
Yes.
As you can see from the memo, we have not closed December entirely, so December is still a bit in flux. The staff is doing great work in the middle of switching to a new financial software system and a new chart of accounts. So we've got a lot of things in flux, so we're a couple of weeks behind, but catching up fast. You can see from the cash on hand that where your cash and investments are, the big note is that we are starting to move the money out of Morgan Stanley as we're required to do and into the Peoples. And the nice thing about that is we moved from getting 0.3% interest on our regular deposit to 1.8% on all of our money. So our interest is really doing well, and we're beginning to, that's looking much better than it has. So I'm pretty pleased with that. What you should know about December is because I haven't closed it, we haven't moved money from the operating back into the FER. There will be a transfer there, so that will change. There'll be more money in the FER and less money in the operating reserve when that happens. Other than that, proceeding as expected.
Okay, anybody else? Bert?
Have we sent a preliminary budget to the select boards? Because I thought we needed to do that and tell them that there will be no increase or no question of their paying us a fee,
Yeah, the assessment, I believe we did that in December.
which
That
would have to be
happens in-
folded into their budget, but
That happens in December.
We did that
I
in
did
December.
do it in December, okay.
Any other questions on that? Okay. We done with finance at this point? All right, next is general manager's update.
Yep, so it was also a reflection of the hard work that Deke and her team have been doing, as well as all of the staff now that we're transitioning away from paper timesheets and into electronic timesheets, and transitioning into QuickBooks and away from Great Plains. So that work is ongoing, and it's been amazing the dramatic amount of time that has been saved in going to an electronic timesheet system. So everyone has adapted to that very, very well, and it's been very smooth. So good news on that front. It is a big transition for a lot of our folks, but we've all adapted quite well.
That's great news. I mean, kudos to staff who's made this happen. A lot of work, I'm sure, a whole lot.
Yes, sure.
Any questions on that, on the general manager update? Okay, I believe next is personnel.
Yes. Yes, so we have a few requested changes that we brought to the exec board in January, and they approved to bring to the full board, fairly minor. The motion does, I'll note, the date says effective January 23rd, so we would change that to today if approved. We wanted to clarify the personal appearance of employees section and just give some more direction for employees of when they're required to wear either uniforms or, for example, the outreach folks have shirts they would wear when meeting with the public potentially, whereas drop-off center folks would have high-vis and they would be required to wear them all the time. So we determined that a department directive would make the most sense, so that we can update that regularly. Also, the safety plan, we just wanted to update that. It's not a policy, it's a living document, it's a plan, changes fairly regularly. It is an appendices of the personnel rules and regulations, but wouldn't require each time to come back to the board. So clarification on that, as well as a few changes that Josh Esty, our Director of Compliance, had made. And also the workers' comp section has been updated. There were some duplicate wording in there and title changes, so we're requesting that that be updated as well. Any questions?
I believe you need a motion for this, right?
Yes,
I
yep,
would
and
move
the
that the Board
date,
of Commissioners approve the revised wording to the personnel rules and regulations as presented in the document dated January 15th.
Okay,
Second.
we have a motion and a second. Discussion on that. Questions?
I guess it needs to be effective January
30.
31st.
yes, today would be fine.
Okay.
All right, great, thank you. Any questions on that? Well, quiet bunch tonight, good. All right, okay, so all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstentions, motion passes. Great, thanks.
you.
Next, I believe, is the MRF quality
Quality control policy.
control policy,
Yes,
so,
Jen.
okay.
So this policy, the Materials Recovery Facility Quality Control Policy, is one that goes back to the original contract with Casella. So it's part of their contract. And what it does is it just provides a policy of what they're to do if a hauler comes in with a lot of contamination in their recyclables. And so it provides guidance on what's done. And so the changes to the policy include just rewording to clarify things a little bit better, to modernize the language. Some of it was pretty old language, and to actually reflect what's being done at the MRF today, as well as some slight changes in the policy itself. And the most significant change that we incorporated was instead of the hauler who was dumping materials, recyclables that were grossly contaminated, having to pay a fee or remove them from the MRF, they would now have the option to work with CSWD to identify the source of that contamination and remedy it. And that is something that not only CSWD staff wanted to see happen and provide that support for the haulers, but also Casella, who operates our MRF, wanted to see that happen as well. So that's been added as another option that would be up to the MRF general manager, their discretionary ability to be able to allow the hauler to do that. Staff at CSWD, including the Outreach and Communications Department, as well as the Enforcement Department, had some input in this, and then we also worked with the operator, the general manager from Casella that operates the MRF as well. So we're looking for approval of these changes.
I would make a motion that the Board of Commissioners adopt the revised material recovery facilities quality control policy as submitted
and strike all previous versions of this policy opposed.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, Ed?
So do we have data on how many loads come in and are found to be contaminated now?
We do, I don't have that for you tonight, but we do keep track of that. It's been, we've seen an uptick recently in the last 6 months to a year, and that's what sort of prompted looking at the policy and revising it, because it was being used quite a bit and to make things more clear and give some more options.
Yeah, out of, I would say, 200 visits in a month, we saw about 6 to 8 historically a month of contaminated loads. That jumped up to roughly 30 for a couple months in the spring when things got real contaminated, and that's when this conversation started. So it's since has settled. I think a lot of the contamination fees have set some of the haulers to go back to their go back to the community and say, hey, we got to figure this out. So it's not as, it's slowing down a little bit, but it's not to say it won't pick back up in the spring again.
Yeah, can we determine really like what is the ripple effect from this policy back to households or businesses who are actually doing the contamination?
Well, the policy has been in place since the 90s. So there's, we don't have any pre-policy information really. And what this did is it clarified things, it made it reflective of what was actually happening at the MRF, and then it gave that other opportunity for us to work with the hauler, and we'll be able to report back on that to see how that's working.
Right, so it's really at the point of interaction at the MRF that you'll have before and after data. I'm just wondering how does it translate back into the relationship between haulers and people who are contaminated?
Well, I think ongoing, the haulers are going back to where they can identify the people that are contaminating because they're incurring these fees and have been incurring these fees, and either raising the price of or charging them an additional cost for those loads.
Okay, and we know that that's happened? Like
Yes.
that there's been tagging or changes in fees?
I know
Yeah.
that there has been a hauler that has gone back to identify the sources and eliminated that contamination. I know of at least one occurrence where that's happening.
Have you ever had a case where the hauler goes to the point where they refuse service due to the contamination?
Where they leave the material at the curb? I would think that would happen. I don't know offhand though specifically.
We have Myers, and they have not picked up ours because there was something wrong. We had to clean it before they would come pick it up.
I believe they leave a tag on your door.
So they come beat on, yeah, I mean, they come. It was actually a 95-gallon recycling cart, so.
Okay. Further questions?
Yeah, I guess I watched a webinar about Massachusetts really trying to take this on, and probably some of you guys watched this webinar as well, on dealing with contamination. And it takes a massive effort to, to educate and really have people fanning out and doing curbside waste audits and having some sort of standardized system of feedback where you can really know that you're making an impact.
Right, and I think that would be Michelle that would be looking at doing that. This is just the policy of once it reaches the MRF, what can the operator do about it? But
I can address that if
Yeah.
you'd like. So, our compliance department has been wanting to do that, and it has plans to do the curbside cart tagging, kinds of efforts that you're talking about. And we've been working with them, we as an outreach have been working with them because it's a delicate balance in educating and rejecting and having people understand why it's getting rejected. And we're also having to be respectful of that relationship with the hauler and the customer. So the MRF and the contaminated loads fee in this new policy where we'll have a very clear and well-defined way that we would interact with the hauler if they choose that route will help us do more of what you're talking about.
I have a question. And I'm also curious about dumpster design, especially recycling dumpster designs, which don't seem to have watertight lids. And so what I notice is that lots of material gets wet. And I'm wondering, does that lead to contaminated? What's the threshold to that material being considered contaminated?
Yeah, that's a great question and point. And moisture is a big problem at the MRF, so if there's a significant amount of moisture in the load, it will get rejected. And it's up to the hauler that provides that dumpster to provide a container that's not going to get the recyclable or to cover the loads when it's snowing out, et cetera.
But it's also up to the MRF operator and supervisor on the floor. Our goal is not to tag haulers and to not have to reject loads. You never want to do that. So, the goal is to always try to use what comes in as best we can. And really, this is to give some more clarity and clarification and the ability to work with haulers who seem to be routinely having issues. And to give them, instead of going straight to the fine, say, well, let's engage more. So sometimes, if we have the space, and we don't always have the space for the reasons we've discussed, if it's slightly wet and might be on the border, we can move something to the side. Maybe we can wait a little bit, see if it dries out, try to run it. So if it's soaked, then that's clear. The hauler should know. They get it. They don't fight it. That pretty much goes to the fine, and they pay it. So this is just to give everyone, like Jen was saying, more clarity, some options to bring us in a more structured way. I think it's a good move.
Any other questions?
I was just wondering, I'm still jumping.
No, I'm sorry.
Can you just clarify you said it's an option, so instead of paying a fee or removing the material, then they basically work with you to identify the source.
Right, so
just to finish the question, so my question is, so what happens with the material?
So the options are you either remove the material from the floor, right, for the hauler, or they pay an associated, a fee, or if the general manager or operator at the MRF thinks that we can work with this hauler to identify the source, then they give them that option. And then that hauler would contact CSWD, and there's going to be another separate document that we're working on. That's the action plan, the contamination action plan that will outline, as Michelle said, how we would interact with the hauler and try to remedy the situation.
That's not your question.
No, there's two different types of, so there's the contaminated load that still gets processed, and you get assessed a contamination fee
Okay.
for that, and then there's rejected loads. We don't see a lot of rejected loads. I think maybe one a month when it's real bad, two a month when it's real bad. They don't want to reject the loads.
Right.
But, if you've got certain materials that are really bad for the equipment, or that will wrap, or that are just blatantly, garbage, then they'll reject it. And that happens sometimes. A split packer will dump garbage on accident, or we'll have sometimes people have sections of garbage and recycling, and they're sitting on the tip floor, and it's, it's like you can't do that. So that's the piece that Jen's talking about with the extended action, where we can go through the outreach group. That's for the rejected loads, and that's really to kind of hit that one particular route that constantly has an issue that kind of everybody knows about. It gives the hauler the ability to use our resources. So that's the difference.
Yeah, I was just wondering about, once it hits the floor, they take the option of working with you through this new source identification. What happens to the stuff that's on the floor? I'm just curious about the logistics of that, so that was my question.
Oh, it goes through the process, yeah,
That was my question. Thank you.
sorry.
Other questions?
I've seen this problem from the other end, being a landlord and having tenants and having established a dumpster for garbage and a dumpster for recycle, trying to teach the tenant what to put in which place, and it never seems to work. I did seem to find that if they had children who were instructed at school by our staff, those tenants seemed to comply better. But it is a problem of education at the family level, and I'm not sure how the district can, and the haulers can get involved in this other than try to push back as best they can.
Well, and I think we did see, for instance, Wanda and her team came and presented about, showed us how
Yeah.
they reach out to the schools and all that great stuff, so. Further questions or discussion? Is that anybody? Okay, so I think, I'm sorry, did we already have a motion?
We did.
We did,
Yes.
okay. All right, if we're done, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstentions? Okay, great, thanks very much. Next is the
grant.
community grant program discussion.
Yep, and that's Michelle.
Michelle?
Yeah, so, in preparation for the budget, I was prompted to, review all the ways we're providing funding to support the member communities. And, in doing that, thank you. It stood out to me that we have two funds, the Community Cleanup Fund and the, How We Support Green Up Day, that directly support funding for cleaning up illegally or improperly disposed materials. And then we have one fund that I oversee, the container and project grants, that is really more designed at prevention of waste and illegally or improperly disposed materials. I've had several board members express a desire to do more in the way of prevention and asking, and specifically sometimes about the Community Cleanup Fund, can we apply those funds toward things that would prevent just illegal disposal? And that's not what that fund is intended for. So the point of this memo is just to make really explicit and clear the funding we're providing for cleaning up materials that shouldn't have been littered or disposed the way they were, versus the funding that we're providing to prevent that. And also some of the inconsistencies that I uncovered specific to Green Up Day funding. And I can speak more about that in more detail if you'd like. I've also realized in retrospect that one of the questions I posed to the board probably did not have adequate context, and that was the question about partnering with social services agencies, so I can provide more context on that if anybody likes. Would you like me to read the specific questions?
Talk about what the problem is. I mean, a lot of us are using the community cleanup funds, and, I mean,
So, the first question I have is, does the board want to continue funding, this funding of these efforts at this level? So, as you see, between Community Cleanup Fund grants and Green Up Day donation and fee waivers, for the FY19 budget, it's almost $30,000. And that's specifically targeting cleaning up material that shouldn't have been littered or disposed. And then we have $25,000 that we budgeted for prevention. If the board feels that's appropriate, then that's great. I'll use that information going forward for the FY20 budget season. The second question is, does the board support, or is the board interested in changing that balance any and diverting any of the cleanup money that we're currently putting into community cleanup fund grants, or the way we support Green Up Day, some of that into more preventative types of programs, such as maybe containers in public areas, such as, for instance, Jericho, use some funding to provide trash and recycling station on the town green and at the cemetery. Efforts like that, potential cameras or like game cameras have been mentioned as something to put in place at illegal dump sites, like where tires are dumped and things, so that you could actually see who's doing it. And then the third question would be the partnering with social service agencies. I put in there because we have had requests for potentially things like vouchers, that sort of thing, to provide assistance to people who are under financial hardship or have transportation limitations or disabilities and can't get their items or afford to pay for their items, like, and then they end up potentially, possibly on the curb, or illegally dumped. And this would be an agency such as AgeWell, which deals with senior citizens and refugee resettlement or something like that, would be the potentially vetting agency. Since their expertise is in identifying need and verifying that, we would not be involved in that. We would partner with them. Once the people are identified, or the population is identified, we could potentially provide vouchers or something like that to enable proper recycling or disposal of these materials that are being improperly managed.
So if I understand correctly, you're looking for guidance in 3 areas. First being, do we want to continue the programs?
That's correct.
Second being, if we do we want to change the balance?
Correct.
And third is, do we want to enter into a new initiative to potentially help low-income people?
Exactly, or others.
So I'd
in
like to
need.
suggest we take it one at a time rather
Sure.
than, so let's just, if you don't mind, let's talk about, do we want to continue these programs? I mean, so let me just see if, yes.
Well, Heinsberg last year used, their cleanup fund, and we basically had 3 years, I believe, that had accumulated, so it allowed us to do a project. The town by town, it's not a huge amount of money to put towards these projects. And Heinsberg, I think, did one other one a number of years ago that was similar, where, the people weren't financially able to clean up, and the town health officer determined the property was condemned or whatever, and pretty much the case of this last one. So as far as the town's cleanup fund, I think we should certainly continue that program. It's not, I don't believe it to be a financial burden to the district, and it does help these special circumstances. As to funding preventative things, I think that is a good idea, because eventually, if you don't do that, then someone else has to pay for it. And, the solid waste district is responsible for solid waste in Chittenden County, and we should take the lead on preventative measures. Heinsberg has not had a huge problem with illegal dumping in the last few years, but back in the, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, we did have a big problem. And our highway crew put up barriers and stuff so people couldn't pull off to the side of the road in those areas and dump couches and refrigerators and tires and stuff, because every year the town would go and have to clean that up, and we'd have to pay for disposing of it. So I think that those 2 areas are good. The third area, about vouchers for low-income people or something, I think that it would be better that each community handled that on a case-by-case basis. That would be my call on that one.
Let me, again, I'd like to, at least for this first discussion, see if anybody has any concern, do we want to keep these programs, the cleanup fund and the prevention? So let's say Alan.
I'm right behind Lynn. I think the 2 programs that we have going are valuable programs. We should keep them going. Essex has used them and whatever. And I don't believe that we should start getting involved with social services as a municipal organization. That's the local community's responsibility, and they can work through that process.
I believe, Leslie?
I second Alan's comments, and I would say that our experience last year in Jericho, we did use a small amount of community cleanup fund, and it had to do with solid waste on a property that the homeowner did not have the means to clean up. So the two things worked together. We didn't have to involve social services. Our communities are small. Everybody knows everybody. I don't think we need to go in another direction. And honestly, the amounts involved are so small relative to our budget. I have no problem with the proposed amounts for fiscal 19, for the current year. I don't understand the Green Up Day issue. What's the problem? It's a $10,000 thing. Is it something we need to deliberate here? I don't see.
Let me ask it this way. Is there anyone here, a board member, that would like to see us get out of the community cleanup fund or the prevention, stop those expenditures? Isn't it? Okay.
No, I'd like to hear what the utilization patterns have been, for like the last 5 years across the town, and what the staff feels has most efficacy.
For which
Just
fund?
which grant,
For which fund?
Prevention or the grant?
Well, looks like Green Up Day is used to its capacity every year, I think, pretty much, so, but the first two funds.
Well, just to clarify for Green Up Day, the reason that's included here is because it's inconsistently used. For instance, one of the issues we've had is we see something like 300 tons of tires come in.
Yeah.
And the Green Up Day coordinator reports there were 34 tires from that community, for example. So we suspect, and I polled other solid waste management entities around the state, and there's a great suspicion that, for instance, town garages are hoarding their tires, and they're bringing them in, and then Green Up Day, we're funding that disposal via our Green Up Day fee waiver. And that's okay if the board wants to fund town garage disposals that way, but I would like it to be overt and known, this is what we're funding, this isn't tires found by the roadside. My concern is that if it's listed as towns found by the roadside, and included in that is state V-Trans tires that they're collecting and bringing in, that we're paying for, then that data is going to be seen somewhere down the road, and oh my goodness, look at all these tires that people are littering. We should do something about that, and it's not littered tires. But that's how it's categorized because it's called Green Up Day. So those are some of my issues, and we are the only solid waste management entity in the state that is donating to Green Up Day at their suggested rate. Nobody else donates to Green Up Day on behalf of their member towns, except for Lamoille, and that's at $100 a town for $1,200. So if the board is fine with that, then that's my direction, but I just want to be clear, this is what we're funding with regards to Green Up Day. And I'm happy to explore and just contact them and have a discussion about how our funds that we're providing are being used. And that information is being tracked. So that's Green Up Day. I can discuss the others separately.
I don't have broad experience in Chittenden County, but I think in Charlotte, it's not the town road maintenance people. It is people, however, they're bringing tires in because they know that they're accepted. So it's not that they've been littered. They're being, they're just being brought by homeowners to the truck and put in there. So, and some of those might end up on the roadside if that weren't happening, if that opportunity weren't available to them on Green Up Day. I don't know about other towns.
Further comment on that question?
just supportive of all of this. The only comment I would make, we have had a lot of turnover in Milton over the last couple of years. And I've found that when a new manager or a new administrative person comes in, they often don't know these funds are available. And it isn't until it comes up and I mention it to them. So some outreach to make sure that the towns actually know these funds are available would help.
So we do contact town managers twice a year about the community cleanup fund, and our new outreach coordinator has been doing that every January and every about May in preparation for the end of the fiscal year for that cleanup fund. We will be doing a better job on the waste reduction grants.
I would also suggest contacting the Public Works
Okay?
directors, because my experience has been, town manager's been so busy, I don't think he's communicated the availability of this to the Public Works director. So I contact the Public Works director, you know, directly. It's easy to do, and I've gotten more response. Other comments? Yes.
It might also be a good idea for board members to talk to their town administrators to make sure that there's a link on the town website about this.
Further comments on this? Regarding the balance in terms of how much we're spending, could you review that again, what we're spending on the two funds?
Well, so in the memo, the chart at the front just has for FY18, we spent just under $14,000 on cleanup fund, and that's a $19,000 rotating fund, you know, that the board voted to cap each town, so
Right.
that's how that works. Green Up Day, last year we spent just under $11,000, and with the waste reduction container and project grants, we spent about $11,000 last year, and that's varied wildly, depending from $3,000 to $13,000, actually close to $20,000, depending on the year.
So, does anyone have any trouble with that level of expenditure?
And just to be clear, the cleanup fund, as approved by the board, is not for preventative projects. It's for cleaning up problem areas, so.
And that was one of the other questions. We wanted to kind of take the temperature of the board to say, do we want to expand the scope of what the cleanup funds can be used for? It's fairly narrow, but
But I mean, as the projects come in, and I know I've had 2 or 3 of them, you know, we can expand it a little bit or draw it down if the board member thinks it's a good thing to do. And you know, I mean, I think it's worked well in the past, and I don't see any reason why we can't follow those similar guidelines in the future.
Okay.
I think the question is around consistency.
Yes, so, for instance, staff is uncomfortable with rejecting a request by a board member if the staff feels that it is outside the purview of the cleanup fund.
And they should.
Should feel uncomfortable with that? Okay, so I will duly noted, and we will explain why we feel that what the board approved is not what the member is requesting if that comes up.
I know, I meant it the other way around.
Oh, okay.
They should feel concerned if they don't want to approve what a board member wants to have done in their town.
I agree. So then the board would need to approve that the cleanup fund is available for an expanded application, is what I'm saying, because under the current policy, we're not allowed to use it for preventative projects. That's all.
And there has been an uptick recently in the past few years of requests to do something a bit different, because there aren't those issues every year where there's an emergency in the town and needed to be used. So what we're looking for is, you know, is there a sense that we do want to be able to have some flexibility and to be able to expand the scope? Right now, we're restricted. Leslie?
So what kinds of requests have not met the criteria for cleanup funds, but do meet the criteria for waste reduction project grants. I mean, somebody comes and say, I want to use cleanup funds to do this, and you say, no, that's really a waste reduction project. So, big deal. You say, okay, we're funded under this other heading. This is.
Okay, if it's a non-issue, we can move on.
I don't understand why these are such big problems.
It's because we have very clear scope under one and not so clear under the other. So,
you direct somebody to the other one. What's the big deal?
I mean, I personally have had projects, inquired about projects and have been told no, because of the strict parameters. So I would appreciate flexibility. That was like practically a year ago, so I can't give you examples. But because of the guidelines, the eligibility factors, the project ideas that I had were not within the guidelines of that. So.
I think you're getting a sense from the board that flexibility is desired.
So what I believe I'm hearing is I can bring the community cleanup fund guidelines back for revision and approval to expand the scope so that the staff will feel comfortable and giving the commissioners full authority.
I'm on the line. I was rejected on one, and I agreed with Michelle in the end, in that the fire department had I forget whether it was a water damage or a small fire within the firehouse, and they had a lot of material that they had to dispose of in order to clean it up, and they wanted to use the cleanup funds that the waste district had, and Michelle and I discussed it, and in the end, it was turned down, because I think the fire department was it's a separate entity between the towns of Jericho and the town of Underhill, and they have their own budget from the towns, so that the financial support would have been, in a civic manner, helpful to them, because they wouldn't have to use their own funding. But in the end, we didn't feel it fit the criteria of the district. It wasn't trash sitting by the roadside. And I think this is the type of question you get into that when you say you want to expand this to other requests, is to who is the person or what is the group that's asking for it, and what are the circumstances of how the trash was accumulated. And that leads you into a big open area, and I see that as a problem.
Yeah, and I don't believe you're going to be able to quantify every possible scenario, but I mean, I think you're seeing the board would like some flexibility in the use of those community funds. And so I would suggest that you take a look at it and bring it back at some point in the not-too-distant future.
I mean, I just think that the towns are budgeted a certain allotment. What's the problem with allowing a little bit more discretion for the town? If they expend it all, then they do. I don't know, it's not necessarily hurting my municipality if another's already kind of burning through their allotment.
I mean, we used the money for Milton, so it allowed them to dispose of some tires that were in a tire warehouse. So I mean, the flexibility's there, and, I mean, you followed Bert's guidance, with respect to the thing in Jericho. I mean, I think the board member has a big role to play in this.
I think that discussion with the board member is key. I think that's really great that you had that and do that, so that's good. I think, Abby?
I felt some frustration just feeling like I've bumped into a little bit of a bureaucracy for some good ideas that have come from my town. And the example is not necessarily, just wanting to have, what are they called? the just collapsible waste.
Clear streams.
Yeah, the Clearstream stations, not have people drive all the way from Charlotte to Redmond Road to borrow them for free. Why can't our town, or all of the towns, be given those containers to be housed and circulated by their town libraries, have a training attached to it, some sort of memorandum of understanding of, I mean, I just think ideas like that, I don't know what Winooski's idea was, but if a town comes up with an idea that they're invested in, and it somehow doesn't fit right in, then it's a shame to lose that motivation.
So I think we would like to come back with a proposal on how we may possibly want to reshape some of the criteria with that.
Thank you. Yes, Alan?
We have a new lawyer here tonight.
Oh, yes,
Board
that's
member
right.
here.
Sorry, my apologies. Thank you.
Sorry, I was a couple minutes late. Russ McCracken from Paul Franklin Collins, filling in for Thomas Maloney tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, I'm sorry. Good point, good point. And so, and just towards the last item, I believe, I mean, I know I've heard it, 3 people express that we do not want to enter into the business of subsidizing the low income at this point, unless someone else has something to say on that.
It'd be interesting to, if there was some record keeping or some type of assessment of need that over time we show an increase and we can revisit it.
Okay,
Can do.
okay, good.
And are people, pointed to resource or some, like maybe the Run Smooth Junk or some of those groups might offer that service at cost or even for free in certain cases, you think? I don't know. I think you were referring to that.
May I just add one other? So part of what we've seen is occurrence of free dumpster days being funded in different neighborhoods that we were trying to address in part through this with a more targeted support so that the dumpster day would go away and wouldn't just be a free-for-all where people are encouraged to get rid of whatever they have accumulating for free, which is, we felt, not in the district's mission of propagating the concept that this stuff is free.
Just one quick comment. Back in the beginning, when we established this town's cleanup funds, was basically to offset the tipping fee for the towns to take stuff to the landfill. That was the basic premise for it. And, it's maybe changed over the years, but that was the idea of setting it up. And it's not a lot of money. We're discussing a lot of this, and it's just not that big a budget item.
Okay, should we move on to any other business at this point, I believe? Anything else? Okay, and how about program updates? Any questions on program updates? Okay, and lastly, we do have an executive session we need. There are 2 items, I believe it is, we need to discuss. So did you give someone the wording for that?
Amy, do you have wording for
I don't know which one's it right
Art, you want to do the honors, or?
He's not a board member.
I'm sorry, Leslie's here, sorry. Apologies.
I move the Board of Commissioners of Chittenden Solid Waste District go into executive session to discuss GMC contracts where premature general public knowledge would clearly place the district, its member municipalities, and other public bodies or persons involved at a substantial disadvantage, and to permit staff to be present. And was there another item that we want to?
biosolids contract as well? The biosolids contract?
And the biosolids contract.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay, just got a moment to get down.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, we are back in session after the executive session. Are there any motions that anyone would like to make? Alan?
With respect to the biosolids management service agreement, be it resolved that the Board of Commissioners authorizes the Executive Director to extend the existing residual management service agreement with Casella Organics that was scheduled to end on 31 January 2018 to no later than 28 February 2019, and to adjust the start and end of the 5-year term of the accepted residual management service agreement to reflect the signature date.
Second.
All right, discussion on that motion. Oh, did you want to say something now? I'm sorry. Okay. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay, great, motion passes. Are there any other motions? We have a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. Good discussion.